Welcome to the Be Ruthless show, where we have the conversations that other people don't, the conversations that other people won't. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and I'm ready to make a lot of noise and disrupt things, ruthlessly. Thanks for being here today. Now let's get to it. Welcome back to the Be Ruthless show. I'm your host, Sam Ruth, and joining me today is Dr. Kevin Payne, who is a social psychologist, entrepreneur, author, and skydiver, and he's doing it all with MS. When he lost everything he cared about, he decided to rebuild his life by facing the fear of his uncooperative body in the air and becoming a skydiver. 600 jumps later and counting, he found his home in the sky. Born from a decade of research, Your Life Lived Well is his labor of love. A book, a podcast, a curriculum of classes, organizational services, and a technology. They all support those whose lives have been touched by chronic illness. There's no one answer to living well, but Dr. Payne is committed to showing you the practical tools you can use to build the life you want. Thank you so much for being here.
I am delighted to be with you today, Sam.
This is such a relevant and important topic because millions are suffering with chronic illness, and your story is so inspiring. So you didn't just decide to go for it, you decided to skydive.
Well, yes. So to your first point, half of all Americans now have at least one chronic health diagnosis. 18% of us have 5 or more.
Wow.
It's just jaw-dropping when you think about it. And so my story is typical. It's not, well, maybe not the jumping out of planes part, but for me, I needed a radical exposure therapy to help me face my growing fear of my dysfunctional body. So for me, skydiving wasn't about fear of heights. You know, I'd wanted to be a skydiver from the time I was a little kid. I'd had a handful of jumps in the 1990s when I was in my 20s and started the training. And so, yes, it was about going back and reclaiming something I thought I'd lost. But fundamentally for me, it was with multiple sclerosis, my body had betrayed me on many occasions. And I had found myself withdrawing from life and folding in on myself. And that wasn't an existence that I was interested in pursuing. So for me, skydiving was about getting back to claiming life.
And I think it's so relevant. People do not realize that an illness is something that leads you to lose the life you thought you had. And so doing something radical is a healthy step. And so many people do what you said, they withdraw, you know, whether it's not wanting to get sick in public or not wanting to have an episode. So I know personally, and I have friends and family who just don't want to take that leap. So this is so relevant to talk about because it's not just going out the door, it's what you choose to do when you go out the door.
Well, and that's it. Even if you have not experienced a skydive, you know that fear is an intimate part of the experience. And if you are up there doing your first tandem skydive, and that's usually how people start nowadays. That's not how we started back in the 90s, but that's how people usually start. So you are physically attached to somebody who's really experienced, and you're going to be a tourist, right? And you're going to enjoy this experience. But you know, when we go up on a load and we are about to go out, well, the pilot will flip on a light by the door, and one of us experienced skydivers by the door, because the solo jumpers go out first, typically, and we'll fling the door open and someone will shout, "Door!" And the entire cabin of the plane will be just suddenly filled with this roaring wind. And all of the newbies, their eyes get really big at this point. And that's when it becomes really, really real. And there's fear inside the plane. But what we have to understand is once we pass through that fear out into the experience, there is such joy and mindfulness and presence and accomplishment once we get through that barrier that we have placed for ourselves.
Sassy here is stepping on the cords. Can you excuse me? Thank you. I pictured the computer flying with you in the air there. It's empowering. It's free. Not that I've ever gone skydiving, but reclaiming things and control of your life. So empowering and freeing. So I picture myself having to be pushed out of the plane.
They generally don't do that. You have to say yes. And, but yeah, it's a big deal for people to get through that first thing. But what I want to get at is skydiving is an obvious edge experience. Okay, most people can agree that unless you are somebody who's done it a gazillion times, then the act of jumping out of the plane is no longer edgy. It's just Tuesday, you know. but we find our edges in other ways. And what I want to emphasize is that we all need edge experiences, because the edge is where we grow. It's where we feel accomplished. It's where we learn. It's where we really connect with other people. And all of those are the powerful human experiences that give our lives the color and flavor and texture that we crave, and that we remember fondly, that allow us to look back on our lives and think, gee, we did that well. And edges, when you live with a chronic illness, can become painfully, humiliatingly small sometimes. So yeah, on a good day, I'm jumping out of airplanes. But on a bad day, my legs are barely working, and it's difficult for me to get from one end of the house to the other. My hands aren't working, and it's difficult for me to get them to get the medicine that I need to take into my mouth. And I can be someone who has both kinds of edges, right? We all can be that kind of person. And because we can visit one obviously extreme edge, doesn't mean that some other edge is not something that we become very conscientious about.
And it's so true. Connection is so important, but I think a lot of people with illness withdraw, like you said. So how do you what's the first edge? What's the first step so that people don't continually withdraw and isolate based on fear or embarrassment, whatever the case may be? I see that more than I see people living on the edge.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think part of it is because we don't necessarily have an accurate image of ourselves as we're walking around in the world. And most of us, unless we have specific diagnoses that are dealing with certain mental health issues, most of us have at least a slightly better than the facts warrant image of ourselves. And that's actually good, and that's healthy. And so if you have one of these humiliatingly small edges, right? And this does not fit with your image of what you think you should be doing, your expectations for yourself, your attributions for yourself, then you can withdraw, because now you are placing yourself in contempt. You are diminishing yourself, and you're saying that's not an edge that I should be having to deal with. And I understand, I was there, because MS really laid me low. And one of the things that I had to do, and one of the reasons why going back to skydiving was so critical for my self-development, was because I had spent the previous 20 years or so always being the expert in the room. I'd been a professor, I'd been the expensive consultant. I mean, that's what I'd done. So and although I had always prided myself on being a person who loved life and seized life and loved collecting experiences, because I really think that's what life is about, collecting experiences. And I had to come to a place where I could admit that I had stopped doing that. I had gotten to the point where I was always that expert. And so I was always in the comfort zone. When I went back to skydiving, I knew I was going to suck at it because my legs don't work correctly all the time. I can't feel my legs below my knees often. And having leg awareness and being able to control your legs is actually a really important skill in free fall. You must be able to do this. Otherwise, when your legs are out of balance, you start spinning and tumbling, and it looks terrifying. And so I knew this was going to be an issue. Not to mention standing up a landing when you can't feel your feet. That's that's a whole nother set of challenges. So I knew that I was going to have to reconnect with my own humility in a way that I had not for a very long time. And the key to getting started with real edge experiences is to honestly understand where your edges truly are right now. And we don't want to see that sometimes. But the issue is, and let me define the edge the way I use it in the book, and that's the edge is a ratio. And it's a ratio between what capacity you can deliver in this moment to whatever you're trying to accomplish is demanding of you. So if your capacity is really high and the demand's really low, then you're bored. And this may be in the realm of habit even. But as your demand increases closer to the capacity you can deliver, now you're getting into the edge. And when you can still deliver more than is needed, this is a flow experience. And we love flow experiences. That's where we feel alive and engaged, and it's wonderful. But then as the demand passes over the capacity we can deliver, now we fail and we're overwhelmed. And then if it's really high compared to what we can do, that's traumatic. That's where trauma lives. So if you think your edge should be at one place, but it really isn't, maybe it's a place that you used to be able to go all the time. Now what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for trauma.
And I want everyone listening, because I know my audience and I know I have people with physical illness, but we could be talking right now about grief, mental illness. I'm relating this to my grief journey. It was
Most
no
definitely.
different, recognizing where I was. And that was not where I thought I should be. And that was a huge shift. So everyone listening, this applies to you in some way at some point in life, even if it's not physical. So that's a great description.
Well, and I really want to emphasize that edges can be physical, they can be cognitive, they can be emotional, they can be behavioral, they can be social in our relationships, right? They can be operational. And something can be an edge in one of those dimensions, because usually what we do has to pass through all of those. There's a physical dimension, there's a cognitive dimension, there's an emotional, there's social, all that stuff. If you can't deliver the capacity in any of those gates, think about as gates and stages, right? If you can't do that, you're still going to fail. And you're still going to find that traumatic. So that's where you have to develop the capacity, or you have to find ways to lower the demand so that you can get over that part of it.
And we need to emphasize that then the edges can grow and your capacity to perform can grow, because I really, really, truly could not go to the grocery store. That was the most difficult experience for me. And I certainly now can go grocery shopping, but I didn't feel like I would ever again. So,
Right.
you grow from that, and the leaps become larger, and maybe one day it'll be a plane, but
Yeah.
it starts with whatever is stressing you out right then and there.
Right. And what I want to also emphasize here is we don't just need to be concerned with the edges in our lives. We need to understand that in order to, so you have the edge experience, and the edge experience is always stressful, but there's good stress, eustress, and bad stress, distress, right? And they live right next to each other at the edge. So if you pull yourself back from the possibility of a distressing experience, then you also pull yourself back from the possibility of that good, nourishing, growth-inducing eustress experience. But we can't live at the edge. We have to understand that we stress ourselves at the edge in good ways, not bad ways, not overwhelming, not traumatic, good ways. And then we pull back to our home. So we got the edge, then we've got the home. And in our home, this is where all of the growth actually happens, because we allow ourselves to rest and recover and nourish and recuperate and sleep and consolidate and all of those good nourishing things that we need to do so that we can go back out to the edge. So we're not just concerned with the edge, we're concerned with the repeatable edge.
Well,
Where can
and
I go
home is not
today?
taught. We are not
Yeah.
taught in this fast-paced world to rest and recover. It's looked down upon by many.
Mm-hmm.
So this is hugely important. I say it to my clients all the time. It's not just getting through an event. It's taking
Yeah.
care of yourself after. Nobody sees what we go through with whatever invisible illness or ailment we're dealing with. But
Mm-hmm.
we know it's there, and I know I always have to recover after something. So if you schedule
Exactly.
that time in and you heal and you get through it, the next time isn't doubly difficult.
Exactly. Because you're learning. What we have to realize is that getting something done is not just about getting something done. The behavior is also doing identity work. It's also teaching you and everybody else around you about you.
That's key. And except not everybody receives it the same way.
Mhm.
There are
Right,
people who still miss old Sam,
right.
but I stand firm in who I am. I think people listening might be more in that struggle,
Mhm.
not as secure as but we have both been in that stressful place. So how do you, what's one, I mean, my therapist told me just one thing a day, because I was setting
Mhm.
myself up for failure every day with these goals of where I should be. What's
Right.
one way to start? Is there a simple edge you recommend, or is it different for each person?
Well, it's different for each person, and that's one of the things that I talk about, that I really emphasize in the book and the classes and all that stuff, that I'm not here to push one particular way. What I'm here for is to help give you better tools or even meta tools to help you make better decisions about building your own path. But what I can say is that we almost always overestimate where our real edge is going to be at the beginning.
Yes.
We don't realize how much we've atrophied. And it happens really quickly. And it doesn't
Yes.
just happen physically, it happens mentally, emotionally, socially, it happens in your relationships too,
Mm-hmm.
because the characteristic of living systems is a living system will adapt to perform at the level it is demanded to perform at. And otherwise, we're resource misers. We want to conserve, and a polite way of saying we're lazy, but we are, and we want to conserve our relationships. So if we don't work our bodies, our muscles atrophy. If we don't work our brains, our critical and cognitive skills atrophy. If we don't continually interact with one another and support one another in difficult circumstances, our relationship, that trust and respect and hope that form the foundation of relationships atrophy. And so I'll go back to what I said earlier and emphasize, if you misjudge your goals and you judge too high, you're setting yourself up for a traumatic experience. And I really want to emphasize, there's mental health issues we think about as in analogy to physical health issues. And we forget that there are really two broad root causes for physical health issues. There's disease, okay? And disease can be genetic, or it can be viral, or any of those things, or it can be injury. And I would argue that for many of the most common mental health challenges that we face, depression and anxiety, and obviously post-traumatic stress disorder, which I don't like calling PTSD, I call it post-traumatic distress, because we emphasize the wrong things there.
Mhm.
So what I'm getting at is, injury is a better metaphorical lens for us to see many of the challenges that we deal with on a mental health front than only disease.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and if we look at it as an injury, well, what do we do when we injure ourselves? Well, we rest, we recover, but we also rehab. And we have to do that cognitively and emotionally and socially as well.
Socially is huge. How important is it for people in this difficult state, when connecting might be harder based on what they're going through, to find new people who understand what you're going through? Because for me,
Yeah,
that was huge, but that can sound really overwhelming to somebody deep in a struggle.
it can. And I've always been a very social person, but when my MS got to its worst, my then wife and kids gave up on me. And those were my people that I chose, and they ultimately decided not to choose me in return. And I was still in here. I was still struggling. I was still trying to, but I was dealing with a massive right frontal temporal exacerbation. So, I mean, the symptoms are basically like the laundry list from dementia. And so it was really awful. And so I couldn't get away from it, but they could, and they decided to. And so now I've got all of the issues that I'm facing from the MS, but then I also have a profound depression, because I think I'm one of those who thinks that in most cases, depression has a social component to it. And so uh, I, I was lost. And then in the midst of all that happening, my Akita Nemo passed away traumatically in front of me, and with bloat, and it was just awful. And then 3 days after that, I was almost struck by lightning. So I was at the end of my rope, and I couldn't see a path forward.
Right.
So one of the things that going back to skydiving did for me was that it is a very social activity. And there is, and we see this kind of very close bonding amongst, say, military and first responders, people who are obviously confronted with death and the edge. And death is a stark reality in skydiving. Now, fortunately, it is a dangerous activity that can be done safely, and we are safer now than we've ever been. But when things go wrong with a skydive, it very easily goes catastrophically wrong. And so skydiving is kind of a memento mori. in that stoic sense, right? It's this reminder that death is always with us. But because we recognize that death is always with us, that is the motivation to seize life while we have it. And for me, every time I jump out of an airplane, a little voice in the back of my head says 82 seconds. Because from 14,000 feet, if I do nothing, my life expectancy is 82 seconds. I will impact the ground and the ground will win. So sometime in every skydive, a skydiver actively must choose life. And that's why on the cover of my book, you've got that picture of me. And that was taken, it took us 8 jumps over 6 weeks to get that image, because I had that exact image I wanted in my head.
I get it. Yes.
Yeah, it tells the story of the book. But I've got my hands up to my forehead like this, and I'm about to sweep them out in a broad gesture. And that's a gesture called the wave off, which I explained in the prologue to the book. And what that's doing is it's telling every other skydiver in my airspace that I am about to take action to save myself. Because you wave off, then you deploy your parachute. And I want everybody to think when they pick up this book, you may feel like your life is in total free fall. You may feel like you are at the mercy of forces far bigger than you. But you are now taking a step to actively save yourself. It's a little tiny step, but that's where it has to start.
And I think it's important to point out, you already loved skydiving. You went back to something that you love. You didn't pick something you'd been deathly afraid of for years. So I'm not asking people listening to go that far and find something drastic. Think of something in your life that you enjoy and find a way to connect with people who share that interest, so you have something in common. And then you recognize the social benefits and the connection. But the point is to get out of isolation, not to do it with something you're terrified of.
Yeah, and that's not it, because people have to understand that, yes, this is something I wanted to do as a child. I had done as a young man. I only had a handful of jumps as a young man. I had 13 jumps when I came back in 2019. But a lot of life had gotten in the way, and health. The important thing is, this was something that I knew was joyful, and it was something that I regretted letting go of in my life. And yeah, look, but it's
so look, that can be music, art, that's so many things for people. There's something, if you are in a stuck place, you do not have to jump out of a plane. Dr. Kevin wanted to.
No, and I would not, people ask me, should I jump out of an airplane? And I said, well, sure. And my answer is always, well, should you? You're going to know the answer to that question, and trust your gut either way. And so that gave me, skydivers call each other Sky Family.
Okay.
Because we have that close connection of people who face death together. Because on a skydive, you have to be able to trust everybody, because somebody, if they don't know what they're doing, they can take you out at 200 miles an hour in the air, and you're going to be knocked out falling to earth. So you've got to be able to trust everybody you jump with, and that breeds a really close connection. And so I found a social connection and a support in the activity that had become lacking in my life.
Right. And so I'm sure everyone can think of something they've never tried that they've always wanted to, or something they did in the past that they let go of. It's about embracing something that makes you think of joy, or, something happy, not something terrifying.
Right.
And I love all the edge, the emotional, the recovery. How can people find the book?
Oh, well, the book, if you go to yourlifelivedwell.co, then you can sign up. You can actually get 100 pages free right now, and see if it's going to be the book for you. And then, it'll be available on Amazon and lots of other places too. So
But yourlifelivedwell.co, that's your website. That's how people.
that
can
is my
connect with you.
website. That's how they can find it. That's how they can find the podcast. That's how they can find the webinars, everything. That's what I do.
Do you have anything coming up that you want people to know about? Because I think so many people struggling might want to reach out and connect.
Sure. We've got, often the events are for specific clients, but I have 3 webinars each week that are on a rotating set of 24 different topics. So you can go there, you can sign up for something and, enjoy it right there.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts for listeners? Last words.
Yeah, I want to emphasize this whole thing that we were talking about your first edges being really small. Underestimate them, right? Because when we're inconsistent, that is a sure sign we're at an edge. Because at one time we're succeed, fail, succeed, fail, succeed. We're bouncing right about that edge. So be kinder to yourself. Show yourself some grace and be humble. And that's okay. You got nothing to live up to. You just have to engage with life on your terms.
Right. And we talked about failure, and I want to emphasize that those were failures ourselves. The world wasn't judging us as failing.
Right.
Those were the expectations we set and didn't meet. So start small, baby steps, be kind, be patient. I love that. And yourlifelivedwell.co to connect. Until next time, everyone, thank you so much for being with us. Always be ruthless. Thanks so much for listening today. Your support means everything to me, truly. If this podcast resonates with you, please do me a favor and join in the Ruthless movement by making some noise and doing one of these 4 things. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Tell a friend so we can break stigmas even faster. Leave a review so people can see what you think of the show. And last, if you want to learn more about me and be a part of the Grief Hab community, please head on over to the Facebook group. We'd love to have you. Thanks again for spending your time with us, and see you next week.